Let's begin here, because too many women have been told the wrong story. They are told that if a man doesn't reach out, it must mean he doesn't care. They are told that silence is rejection, that absence is abandonment, that love must always come wrapped in words and constant contact. Yet this belief has trapped many in anxiety watching the phone more than their own soul. The truth is far more complex. A man's silence is not always neglect. It can be a mirror, a message, or even an unconscious test. And the deeper question is not about him at all. It is about you. Who are you when no one calls? Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us strip away the surface. Our culture has taught us to measure love in responses, in quick replies, in the constant ping of a device. But Jung reminds us what disturbs us in others reveals what lies unresolved in ourselves. If his silence throws you into panic, it is not simply his distance at work. It is the shadow, rising, whispering, of old wounds the child left waiting, the young woman fearing she is not enough. The pain is real, but it is not the whole truth. Silence can be misread as emptiness, yet it often carries hidden meaning. Some men withdraw to gather themselves. Others step back to see if you will chase. And sometimes the absence has nothing to do with you at all. The question is not why he is silent. The question is why his silence shakes you. This is the beginning of individuation, the slow and steady path of reclaiming your center. The persona, the mask you wear smiling, saying, "I'm fine," while your stomach knots cannot hold forever. The shadow, the part of you that fears abandonment, must be faced if you are to find peace. And in that confrontation lies your strength. Silence in its first hours feels like a ripple across calm water. At first, the mind tells itself not to worry. Perhaps he is busy. Perhaps his phone died. Perhaps tomorrow will bring the reassurance of words again. Yet, as the hours lengthen into days, the stillness grows heavier. The pause in contact begins to echo inside the heart, and with it comes a familiar unease. This is the first fracture, not in the relationship itself, but in the inner world of the one who waits. The outer silence stirs inner voices, and those voices often do not speak with kindness. They whisper stories of abandonment, of being unwanted, of never being enough. The fracture is not caused by him alone, but by the old wounds his absence awakens. We must see this clearly. From childhood onward, many have been taught to measure love by constant attention. A caring parent responds quickly. A devoted partner calls every night. A loving friend checks in without being asked. So when silence arrives, it is misread as proof of rejection. It presses upon the very nerves that carry memory, and the old pattern returns. The pause becomes a wound, not because of what it is, but because of what it awakens. Jung reminds us that what we fear most in others is often what we fear in ourselves. His distance is not only his, it mirrors the inner fear of being invisible, of not mattering when we are no longer useful or pleasing. The fracture, then, is not a single crack caused by a message unsent. It is the reopening of a much older break within the self. Consider how quickly the body responds in these moments. The hand reaches for the phone again and again. The mind invents explanations. The breath grows shallow, as if love itself were oxygen being withheld. In truth, the danger is not suffocation, but the belief that another person controls the very air we breathe. This is the illusion that drives the fracture deeper. Notice the contradiction. Many women who are strong in every other field, raising families, leading companies, carrying burdens, heavier than most men will ever know, find themselves undone by a few hours of silence. They become anxious, restless, even desperate. It is not weakness of character. It is a conditioning planted long before they could choose their own meaning. It is the belief that love is proven only through constant pursuit. But silence exposes this belief for what it is, a fragile structure unable to bear weight. For when the phone does not ring, the mind collapses upon itself. The fracture is not in the relationship, but in the foundation of self-worth. To face this honestly is uncomfortable. Yet discomfort is the first doorway to transformation. The truth is simple, though it cuts sharply. Every time we panic at silence, we hand over our power. Every time we chase after reassurance, we confirm to ourselves that we cannot stand alone. This is not judgment, but recognition. For only by naming the wound can healing begin. The old teachings told her if he doesn't reach out, it must mean you're not loved. But what if that teaching itself was the lie? What if silence is not a sentence passed down from him, but a mirror lifted up to her? A mirror that reflects her own dependency, her own fear of abandonment, her own unfinished dialogue with herself. Here lies the paradox. The fracture feels like rejection from the outside, but in truth, it reveals the deeper rejection within the refusal to rest in one's own value, even when no one is there to affirm it. Jung called this the shadow, the part of the self that holds everything the persona tries to hide. The persona says, I am confident, I am strong, I am independent. But the shadow whispers, I crumble when I am not seen. The fracture is where shadow and persona collide. When silence stretches into the second day, the stories in the mind often take darker turns. Doubt grows, anger simmers. Old memories of abandonment, betrayal, or neglect come rushing back. The heart begins to build a case against itself. If I were truly lovable, he would be here. If I mattered, he would not stay away. This inner trial has no jury, no defense. The verdict is always guilt, and the sentence is despair. Yet in that very despair lies the possibility of awakening. For the fracture, though painful, is also a revelation. It reveals where the structure of self has been built on sand. It shows where the inner walls are weakest, where they collapse at the first absence, and only what is revealed can be rebuilt. We must not confuse fracture with failure. A bone that breaks often grows back stronger once it heals. The crack in the vase reveals where the glaze was too thin. Likewise, the fracture of self-worth under silence shows exactly where the work of individuation must take place. The key is not to deny the fracture, nor to rush to cover it with quick fixes. Many try to soothe themselves with desperate messages, with constant explanations, with endless reassurance seeking. But this only deepens the dependency. The real work is to sit with the silence long enough to hear its lesson. To say to oneself, this pain is not about him, it is about me. It is about the part of me that does not yet believe I can stand alone. The first fracture is therefore a teacher, though a harsh one. It teaches that dependency disguised as love will always lead to fear. It teaches that the foundation of peace cannot be built on another's attention. It teaches that individuation, the process of becoming whole, begins not in moments of closeness, but in moments of distance. Silence, then, is not only absence, it is invitation. An invitation to look inward, to face the shadow that trembles when unseen, to release the persona that pretends to be unshaken. The fracture marks the exact place where growth is needed. And so the question becomes, what will you do with that fracture? Will you cover it with false reassurance, rushing to close the wound before it can teach you? Or will you face it with courage, allowing it to expose the parts of yourself that still hunger for validation? Here in part 2, we see the first real shift. The silence that began as a ripple has become a crack in the surface. It is uncomfortable, even painful, but it is also the place where truth begins to show itself. For only when the mask breaks can the real self begin to breathe. The first fracture is not the end of love. It is the beginning of awareness. And it is here, in this delicate and difficult space, that the deeper work of transformation will begin. The first fracture shows itself in silence, and then another pattern begins. Outwardly, she presents the mask of composure. She says to herself, and often to others, that she is fine. She posts a smiling photo. She writes cheerful messages. She insists that nothing has changed. Yet inside, the ground shifts. The inner world grows restless, and a quiet fear begins to stir. This is the dance between persona and shadow. The persona is the mask carefully designed to show strength, confidence, and independence. It is the part of us that wants to be seen as calm, unbothered, and whole. But behind the mask waits the shadow holding every fear that the persona tries to hide. The shadow is the part that whispers, "If I am not chosen, I am nothing." It is the part that panics when silence stretches too long. In these moments, the conflict is sharp. The persona insists on control. I do not need him. I am above this. Yet the shadow trembles beneath, saying, "Why am I not enough? Why has he gone?" The strain between these two forces is exhausting. The outer performance of composure requires energy, while the inner fear drains it. And the cost is heavy, for she lives two lives at once, one for the world to see, and another hidden inside. This is why many women feel so tired after days of waiting. It is not only the absence of communication, it is the weight of holding up the mask while fighting the voice beneath it. Jung taught us that what we resist does not disappear. It gathers strength in the unconscious. Every time we deny our fear of being unwanted, the shadow grows darker, pressing harder to be seen. Notice how the mask tries to compensate. She may send a casual message framed as light and easy, just checking in. She may explain her own silence, pretending it was a choice. I've been busy too. These gestures are not evil or wrong, but they are often attempts to protect the persona, to prove to herself and to him that she is not needy. Yet beneath them lies the hidden plea of the shadow. Please tell me I matter. This tension between persona and shadow is not limited to relationships. It is a pattern that touches every part of life. At work, she may appear confident while secretly fearing she is not qualified. In friendships, she may laugh and reassure while longing for deeper honesty. The mask hides the truth, but the truth leaks out in anxiety, overthinking, or exhaustion. The persona is useful. It helps us navigate the world, but when it replaces authenticity, it becomes a prison. The shadow, though frightening, carries truth. It reveals the wounds we have buried, the early moments of neglect, the painful breakups, the times when silence felt like abandonment. These memories shape the present more than we admit. When the phone stays quiet, it is not only his absence we feel, it is every old absence that was never resolved. This is why the reaction feels so overwhelming. It is not the man alone. It is the accumulation of memory carried into this moment. To see this clearly is to take a step toward individuation. Individuation is not about erasing the persona or destroying the shadow. It is about integration, bringing both into conscious awareness so that we no longer live in denial. To say, yes, I wear a mask sometimes, and yes, there is fear beneath it. In naming both the war within begins to soften. But this stage is not easy. The shadow resists exposure. It prefers to remain hidden, influencing us from the dark. And the persona resists humility, for it wants to be admired, not vulnerable. So the two remain locked in battle. This is why the costs grow higher the longer the silence lasts. She may lose sleep, obsess over details, replay old conversations, analyze every word. The persona tries to appear calm, but the shadow devours energy. Here lies the heart of the struggle. When the shadow is ignored, it erupts in anxious behaviors, constant checking, repeated messages, even self-blame. When the persona dominates, it creates false detachment, coldness, pretending not to care, cutting off prematurely. Neither extreme brings peace. True peace comes only when both sides are acknowledged. Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And here, in the tension between persona and shadow, we see why. To accept oneself means to admit, I am both confident and afraid. I am both independent and longing. I am both strong and fragile. The mind resists this paradox, but the soul requires it. The shadow versus persona. Conflict reveals the cost of splitting. When we live only in the persona, we sacrifice honesty with ourselves. When we are swallowed by the shadow, we sacrifice freedom to fear. Individuation is the path that says you are both. And wholeness comes when you stop pretending otherwise. Think of it like a house with two rooms. In the front room, decorated and tidy, guests are welcomed. This is the persona. In the back room, cluttered and dim old wounds are stored. This is the shadow. Most of us live by keeping the front room perfect and locking the back door. But silence has a way of rattling that back door, shaking loose what we tried to hide. The noise is frightening, but it is also the signal that the whole house belongs to you. The cost of denying the shadow is heavy. Relationships become performances. Communication turns into strategies. Every pause is overinterpreted. Every silence is exaggerated. The energy that could be used for creation, joy, or love is drained into the struggle of hiding. And the tragedy is that the other person rarely sees the mask at all. He sees the behaviors, the anxiety, the attempts to control. He feels the tension even if he cannot name it. Yet the gift of facing the shadow is profound. When you admit, yes, silence awakens my fear, you begin to loosen its grip. The fear no longer hides in the dark. It stands in the light smaller than it seemed. The persona no longer needs to perform endlessly. It can relax, knowing it no longer carries the burden alone. The self becomes more authentic, less divided. This is the middle point of our journey. The fracture has exposed the wound, and now the battle between mask and truth takes center stage. It is a painful stage, but also a necessary one. For only by facing the shadow can we discover the deeper awakening that lies ahead. So, in part 3, we see the stakes more clearly. The silence is no longer just about him. It is about the internal struggle between the self we show and the self we hide. It is about the exhaustion of maintaining a mask while fearing rejection. And it is about the possibility, difficult but real, of bringing shadow and persona together into wholeness. The mask of composure and the shadow of need are not enemies to be destroyed. They are parts of the same self, waiting to be seen and integrated. And when that work begins, the silence outside no longer has the same power, for the real conversation has moved inward. There comes a moment when the weight of the mask and the whispers of the shadow reach a breaking point. She can no longer pretend that silence is only his choice. She begins to see that it is also her mirror. What was once only absence now becomes revelation. And in that revelation, the possibility of awakening appears. Awakening does not arrive like thunder. It is quieter, like the first crack of light across a dark horizon. Something shifts inside almost imperceptibly at first. She realizes that silence, instead of being a punishment, can be a path. The old belief that his absence defines her worth loses some of its hold. And the question changes from, why is he gone, to, what do I discover when I'm alone? Jung taught that individuation is the process of becoming whole, of uniting what has been split between mask and shadow. And here, in the stillness of another's distance, the invitation arises. She is asked to meet herself without the distraction of constant reassurance. She is asked to turn her gaze inward where the true conversation waits. This shift is subtle but profound. Instead of measuring value by response, she begins to sense value in her own presence. Instead of anxiously watching the phone, she notices the silence of her breath, the rhythm of her own pulse, the steady anchor of her body. These are not replacements for affection. They are reminders that life itself flows through her independent of anyone else's choice. Symbolically, silence becomes a threshold. On one side is the old self tied to external validation, always measuring worth in someone else's attention. On the other side is a truer self, anchored in inner steadiness, no longer defined by what arrives or does not arrive. To step across this threshold requires courage, for it means letting die the illusion that love can be controlled. Yet the step itself is liberation. Many resist this crossing. They fear that if they release the old dependence, they will lose love altogether. But the opposite is true. When she awakens to her own center, she no longer clings in fear. She no longer interprets silence as doom. Instead, she lives from fullness. And fullness, unlike need, has the power to attract love that is genuine. Notice the paradox. What once appeared as rejection now becomes an invitation. His absence, painful though it may be, creates space. And in that space, she is free to remember forgotten dreams, to tend to her own projects, to nurture her own soul. The very silence that once felt unbearable becomes fertile ground for her growth. Awakening is not denial. It does not mean pretending that silence never hurts. It means acknowledging the hurt without collapsing into it. It means allowing pain to teach without allowing it to rule. It is the difference between drowning in the river and learning to swim with the current. The water is the same. The relationship to it has changed. Here, the shadow softens. Instead of being a hidden tyrant, it becomes a guide. The fear of abandonment points her back to the inner child who first felt unseen. She can now hold that child with compassion rather than shame. The mask of the persona, too, loosens. She no longer needs to project perfect confidence. She allows herself to be both strong and vulnerable, both steady and human. This is the true Jungian persona and shadow meeting in awareness. Awakening also brings clarity about others. She begins to see that not every silence is manipulation, nor is every absence rejection. Sometimes it is simply the other tending to his own world. Sometimes it is his immaturity, his fear, his way of coping with stress. Whatever the reason, she now knows that his silence speaks more about him than it does about her worth. The mirror still reflects, but the interpretation has changed. This reframe is essential. For as long as she believes silence equals failure, she will remain trapped in dependency. But once she sees silence as a teacher, as an opening, as an invitation to return to herself, the dynamic shifts completely. The silence no longer takes power from her. She draws power from it. Consider the symbolism. Silence is like a doorway in a house long ignored. At first it seems ominous, leading to a darkened room. But when she gathers courage and steps inside, she finds treasures stored there. Dreams, strengths, and forgotten desires waiting to be claimed. The doorway of silence leads back into the fullness of her own life. This awakening does not end relationships. It reshapes them. For when he returns, as often he does not find the same anxious partner waiting. He finds someone who continued to live, who deepened her own roots, who carries stories and passions of her own. He meets a woman who does not orbit around his presence, but who stands as her own center of gravity. And this difference is unmistakable. Yet the deeper point is not about him at all. It is about her relationship with herself. The awakening is that love cannot be begged or bartered. It can only be shared from wholeness. She realizes that when she no longer panics in absence, she has already gained what she sought: peace. Here, we can return to Jung's insight. Everything that irritates us and others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Silence, once irritating to the point of despair, becomes the very teacher that shows her where her center lies. It reveals where she had abandoned herself, and it calls her back. Awakening is never once and for all. It is a practice, a returning again and again. Some days the old fear resurfaces. Some days, the mask tries to return. But each time, she remembers the truth that her value does not depend on another's voice. The awakening deepens. Over time, the silence outside loses its power to destabilize, and the stillness within becomes her home. This is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is love matured. For when she stands in her own wholeness, she can love freely without fear of loss. She can offer care without clinging affection, without demand. She can see the other. He is not as a savior or a threat, but as another human on his own path. So in part 4, the story turns. Silence is no longer enemy, but doorway. The mask and the shadow no longer fight for both have been brought into awareness. And the self, once fractured, begins to unite. Awakening is this: to see clearly, to stand steadily, to live from the center rather than the edges. The silence that once threatened to shatter now becomes the ground on which strength is built. It is here, in this awakening, that the true transformation begins. Awakening opens the door, but a door alone does not change your life. To step through it requires a choice. And here is where the journey becomes more than reflection. It becomes transformation. For once you see that silence is not a verdict on your worth, you must decide how to respond. You must choose whether you will keep waiting, keep chasing, keep explaining, or whether you will set a boundary that honors your own center. This is the turning point. It is not about punishing anyone or withdrawing in bitterness. It is about reclaiming the energy that has been leaking into fear and redirecting it into strength. Jung taught that individuation requires separating what belongs to the self from what belongs to others. In this case, his silence belongs to him. Your response belongs to you. The choice you make becomes the marker of your growth. The old pattern was to panic, to send another message, to analyze every detail. The new path is different. It is simple, though not easy. Stop chasing. Allow silence to be silence. Refuse to abandon yourself in pursuit of someone who has stepped away. This act, quiet as it seems, is a profound declaration of self-respect. It says, I will not collapse when you are absent. I will not surrender my peace for the illusion of control. Consider the difference between a demand and a standard. A demand says you must respond or else I will break. It is rooted in fear, built on the belief that worth depends on another's compliance. A standard says this is how I choose to live, and if you cannot meet it, I will step back. It does not beg. It does not chase it, does not manipulate. It simply stands. Standards are not ultimatums. They are the natural expression of a self that knows its value. Setting such a boundary feels frightening at first. The shadow whispers, if you do not reach out, you will lose him. But here is the paradox. If someone's presence depends on your constant pursuit, you never truly had them. You only had the illusion of connection maintained by your effort. Letting go of the chase reveals the truth. If he values the bond, he will step forward. If he does not, the silence was only delaying the inevitable. Either way, you gain clarity, and clarity is always a gift. This choice also frees enormous energy. Every hour spent checking the phone, every anxious thought, rehearsing what to say, every restless night, analyzing his absence, all of it can be reclaimed. That energy, once bound to fear, becomes available for creation, for friendship, for growth. Many discover that when they stop chasing, they suddenly have time and focus for projects long postponed. They rediscover passions once buried. They notice the beauty of ordinary days again. Silence ceases to be a void. It becomes space. There is a symbolic power in this shift. Imagine a garden left untended because all attention was fixed on a closed door. The soil grew dry, the flowers wilted, the paths became overgrown. But once the eyes turn away from the door and back to the earth, life begins to return. Water flows, seeds sprout, colors emerge. The garden was never gone. It was neglected. And so it is with the self. The moment you stop waiting for someone else's return, you return to yourself. This boundary is also an act of integration. The persona once tried to appear unshaken while secretly unraveling. The shadow once dictated fear-driving anxious pursuit. By choosing to stop chasing, you unite both. You admit the fear, but you do not obey it. You allow the mask to drop, but you do not collapse. This is the strength of a centered self, not perfection, but balance. It is important to note that boundaries are not walls. They are doors with clear frames. They say, "You may enter if you come with respect, but I will not leave myself to drag you inside." They are acts of clarity, not punishment. In relationships, this looks like refusing to beg for attention, but still being open to genuine connection. It looks like continuing to live fully, while allowing others the choice to join or not. It is both firm and compassionate. The consequences of such a choice ripple outward. In the immediate moment, there is peace. The restless checking fades. The obsessive analyzing quiets. Life begins to feel grounded again. Over time, this calm energy reshapes relationships themselves. When he returns, he does not find desperation. He finds someone steady, someone already moving, someone with a life too rich to be paused by absence. The dynamic shifts. And whether he adapts to meet her standard or drifts away, she remains whole. This is why boundaries are not only protective, they are creative. They create a new way of being. They create a foundation upon which healthier love can stand. They create the conditions for individuation, where the self is no longer fragmented into mask and fear, but integrated into a steady presence. The act of stopping the chase is not only about this one relationship, it is about the kind of life you are building. Jung often spoke of transformation as a process of death and rebirth. Something must be let go for something new to emerge. In this stage, what dies is the habit of chasing the compulsion to prove the dependence on constant reassurance. What is born is a deeper standard. Love must be mutual communication, must be reciprocal presence, must be chosen freely. Anything less is not worth the cost. Some may say this is harsh, but clarity is never cruelty. To continue giving energy to one-sided silence is the greater cruelty, cruelty to yourself. A boundary, though firm, is an act of compassion, for it says, "I will not betray myself for the illusion of love." And once this choice is made, a profound calm follows. Think of how a tree grows. It does not chase the sun across the sky. It simply roots itself deeper, lifts its branches higher, and receives whatever light comes. If the clouds cover the sky, the tree does not panic. It does not abandon its place. It continues to grow. This is the image of a self that has set boundaries, rooted, steady, unmoved by passing shadows. So, in part 5, the transformation becomes visible. The woman who once lost herself in silence now stands firm. She does not collapse when absence appears. She does not beg or bargain. Instead, she chooses standards that honor her soul. She continues her life, her work, her joy. She sets boundaries not to control another, but to preserve her own wholeness. And this act of choice, simple yet profound, is the essence of individuation. It is the movement from dependency to dignity, from fear to clarity, from chasing another to living one's own life. The silence that once fractured her now strengthens her. The absence that once drained her now fills her with space to grow. The choice has been made, and in that choice lies freedom. Every journey reaches its end, and here we arrive at the quiet resolution. What began as panic in silence has unfolded into a deeper truth. The absence that once felt unbearable has revealed itself as a mirror, a threshold, and finally a teacher. She no longer trembles at the soundless hours. She no longer checks the phone with restless hands. The power that was once given away has returned to its rightful place within. This is the fruit of individuation, no longer fractured by mask, and fear, no longer caught between chasing and collapsing, but centered whole and at peace. The final lesson is simple but never easy. Your worth is not measured by who calls, who stays, or who leaves. Your worth rests in being in the quiet presence of yourself. When that truth is embodied, silence loses its sting. It becomes what it always was: empty space ready to be filled with your own voice, your own creation, your own life. This is not the end of longing. We are human and we desire connection, but connection must never replace the root of the self. Love offered from fullness is stronger than love demanded from lack. The woman who stands steady in her own center can welcome others freely, without fear, without grasping. And in that freedom, love can flourish in its truest form: voluntary, mutual, alive. Consider the contrast. The one who waits in desperation sees every silence as a wound, but the one who has grown sees silence as clarity. It reveals who truly values presence and who cannot remain. To learn this is to be protected even when the protection feels like loss. The universe often shields us through absence, guiding us away from what cannot sustain us. In Jung's language, this is integration. The shadow of fear has been faced, and it no longer rules in secret. The persona of composure has been softened, no longer an act, but an authentic expression of inner steadiness. What once divided the soul has been united. Individuation is not perfection, it is wholeness. It is the ability to stand in paradox, to hold strength and vulnerability, to love without losing oneself. Here lies the most liberating truth: you no longer need to chase what drifts away. For if someone cannot meet you in respect and presence, their absence is already a message. And if someone does return, they find not a person who begged to be chosen, but a person who chose herself first. That difference is unmistakable, and it changes everything. The quiet no longer frightens. It becomes a sanctuary. In stillness, you rediscover your own voice, your own dreams, your own rhythm. What was once a hollow waiting becomes a fullness of being. This is the great reversal. Silence once feared becomes strength. Let us end with a symbol. Imagine a candle in a darkened room. At first, the darkness feels overwhelming, and you long for someone else to bring the light. But when you finally strike the match yourself, you see that you always had the power to illuminate the space. His silence did not create the darkness. It only revealed where you had not yet chosen to shine. This is the final gift of the journey, to know that no one's absence can extinguish the flame of your soul. That flame belongs to you, and when you tend it, it becomes impossible to forget, impossible to replace. So, carry this with you. You were not born to beg for love, to chase after attention, or to measure your worth in unanswered messages. You were born to be whole, to radiate self-respect, to love from fullness rather than fear. In that wholeness, every silence becomes a lesson, every absence becomes clarity, and every return becomes optional, not essential. And now, as we close, let me offer this reflection. The silence you once dreaded is not the end of love. It is the beginning of truth. Stand in that truth. Build your life from it, and you will find that peace is no longer fragile, but steady, rooted, and your own. Before we part, I invite you to pause and reflect. Which part of this journey spoke most to you? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story may be the very mirror someone else needs to see. And remember, your power is not given by who calls, who texts, or who stays. Your power is yours. Guard it. Live from it. Let it light your way.